They say winter is the season of love, a time for warmth amidst the cold. For most, it's a season of family, laughter, and cherished memories. But for me, it became something entirely different, something I never thought I'd share. This is my story. The love story between me and my grandpa. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a cold winter night, and I was staying with my grandparents after my parents' divorce. Grandpa had always been my protector, my rock, the one who made me feel safe when everything else fell apart. But that winter, something shifted. What started as innocent affection became something I never imagined. I was 18, naive, and vulnerable, caught in the chaos of my parents' messy divorce. Moving in with my grandparents was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to escape the shouting matches and broken promises that had consumed my home. Grandpa had always been my favorite person, wise, kind, and the one who made me feel like I mattered. Grandma was sick, confined to her bed most days, and Grandpa took care of everything. He cooked, cleaned, and made sure she had everything she needed, all while managing the household with a quiet strength that left me in awe. I'd watch him carry her tea upstairs, adjust her blankets, and sit by her side, reading her favorite books in a voice so gentle it could calm a storm. But it wasn't just his strength that amazed me, it was the way he made me feel seen. On those cold winter nights, when the house was silent except for the hum of the heater, he'd sit with me by the fire. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, school, life, my dreams, and the fears I hadn't dared to share with anyone else. He had a way of listening that made me feel important, like my thoughts and feelings truly mattered. In a house filled with grief and unspoken sadness, his presence was the only thing that made me feel less alone. It wasn't just the warmth of the fireplace that drew me in, it was him. We spent countless nights by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting shadows that danced on the walls. It became our ritual. After Grandma had gone to bed, we'd sit together in the quiet of the living room. At first, our conversations felt safe, like the kind you'd expect, between a granddaughter and her grandfather. He'd tell me stories about his childhood, about how he met Grandma, and about the life he had built over the years. But as the weeks passed, the tone of our talks began to shift. I started opening up about things I'd never shared with anyone. I told him about the nights I cried myself to sleep after my parents' divorce, the way their arguments made me feel invisible, and the constant fear that I'd never find stability again. I told him about my dreams of becoming a writer, of one day leaving behind all the pain and starting fresh somewhere new. He listened so intently, his eyes never leaving mine. He'd nod, ask questions, and sometimes share words of wisdom that felt like they were meant just for me. "You're stronger than you think," he'd say. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not enough." And then he started sharing his own stories, things I'd never heard before. He talked about the hardships he faced as a young man, the sacrifices he made for the family, and the dreams he gave up to take care of everyone else. There was a sadness in his voice, a vulnerability that made me feel like I was seeing a side of him no one else ever had. Our laughter came easily, too. He'd tease me about how I burned toast in the mornings, and I'd joke about how he always forgot where he put his glasses. Those light-hearted moments felt like a reprieve from the heaviness that surrounded us. But then there were the silences, those quiet moments when neither of us spoke, but the air between us felt heavy with something unspoken. He'd look at me, his gaze lingering just a little too long, and I'd feel my heart race in a way I didn't understand. It was confusing. It felt wrong, but it also felt so real. He made me feel seen, valued, and cared for in a way no one ever had. Slowly, the lines between comfort and something deeper began to blur. I didn't know how to make sense of it, but I didn't want it to stop. It happened one night, just like so many others. Grandma had gone to bed early, the house quiet except for the crackling of the fire. The snow outside had begun to fall heavier, and the cold seemed to make the room feel even more intimate. We sat across from each other, as we often did, the warmth of the flames flickering between us. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about that night. Maybe it was something about the past, or some trivial thing I had said, but what I do remember is the way his eyes looked at me, so different from before. There was something in his gaze, something that made my heart race in a way it shouldn't have. Then, without a word, he reached for my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped it right then, but I didn't. Instead, I let my hand linger in his, my breath shallow as I tried to understand what was happening. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between us spoke louder than any words could. Slowly, he tightened his grip, and I didn't pull away. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, and I felt the warmth of his touch spread through me, sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to pull my hand back, to run, but I stayed frozen, as if something deep inside me told me to stay. His other hand reached up to gently touch my cheek, his fingers trailing down to my jaw. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't move. The room felt smaller, the air thick with something unspoken. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin, and I could feel the heat between us growing. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. His lips found mine in a kiss that was slow, tentative, but full of something that made everything else fade away. The world outside seemed to disappear as we moved closer, the firelight casting shadows on the walls, but all I could focus on was him. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I had missed my period, and after a few days of feeling off, I knew something was wrong. I bought the test, hoping it would be negative, but deep down, I feared the truth. As I waited for the results, my heart pounded in my chest. The seconds felt like hours, and when I finally saw the 2 pink lines, my world stopped. I stared at the test in disbelief. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. How had this happened? How could I be carrying his child? The weight of the moment crashed down on me, and I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't tell anyone. How could I? My parents? The world? It was a secret I knew I could never share. I found Grandpa in the living room, sitting by the fire as usual. He looked up when I entered, his face softening when he saw the fear in my eyes. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He could see it in my face. I handed him the test, my hands shaking. His eyes scanned the result, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. I waited for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. Instead, he reached out and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, feeling the warmth of his embrace, but it didn't ease the storm inside me. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, his voice calm, steady. "We'll handle it together." His words should have comforted me, but all I could think about was the world outside. What would happen if anyone found out? What would they say? What would they do? I knew that no one would understand, not the way he did. I didn't regret what we had. In that moment, I didn't. It had been something I never expected, something that had taken me by surprise, but it was real. It was ours. But I knew that the world wouldn't see it that way. I knew it would never understand. Grandpa's calmness was a contrast to the chaos inside me. He didn't seem afraid, didn't seem shocked. He just held me, as if everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be. The consequences of what we'd done were already unfolding, and there was no turning back. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me every day. At first, I tried to keep everything hidden, to live in a way that wouldn't draw attention. But it didn't take long for people to start noticing. The questions began, subtle at first, then more direct. Friends, family members, even strangers. They noticed the way I kept my distance, the way my eyes always seemed lost, like I was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't escape the looks, the whispered conversations behind closed doors. I was judged by people who didn't know the whole story, who couldn't understand. They didn't know how hard it was for me to navigate this new reality, to keep pretending that everything was okay when inside, I was torn apart. But Grandpa, he never judged me. He never made me feel like I was wrong. He was the one constant in my life, the one person who knew the truth and still loved me without question. We never spoke about it openly, but I could feel his support in every glance, every touch. He was the only one who made me feel like I wasn't completely lost. Still, the weight of my choices hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't escape the reality of what we had done. I couldn't escape the judgment of the world, the shame I carried with me. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I knew one thing for sure: I didn't regret loving him. When I held my baby for the first time, everything else faded away. The pain, the guilt, the confusion, it all disappeared in that moment. I looked down at the tiny life in my arms, and for the first time in months, I felt something pure, something untainted by the world's judgment. My baby was a part of him, and in that moment, I realized that the love we had shared had created something beautiful. Something real. I couldn't change what had happened, and I wouldn't. This little life, this child, was proof that love could come from the most unexpected places. I spent hours looking at family photos, remembering the way things used to be. I thought about the people who would never understand, who would never see the love we shared the way I did. I thought about the life I had before everything changed, and I wondered if I could ever go back to that. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. The choices I had made had shaped me in ways I couldn't undo. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But through it all, I never regretted loving him. I never regretted what we had shared. It was ours, and no one could take that from me. Looking back, I know many will judge me for what happened. I've heard the whispers, felt the stares, and I've been weighed down by the harsh words of those who don't understand. But love isn't always simple, and life rarely is. We make choices, sometimes without fully understanding where they'll lead, but they shape us in ways we can't always predict. I don't regret loving him. I don't regret the bond we shared, no matter how complicated or misunderstood it may be. I don't regret my child. My baby is a part of me, a part of him, and that love, no matter how it came to be, is real. It's pure. It's mine. And I wouldn't change it for anything. This is my truth, my story. It's not easy to share, and I know it's not something everyone will accept. But I hope that by telling it, I can help others understand that love can take many forms, even the ones we don't expect, even the ones that challenge us. Sometimes, the heart leads us down paths we never imagined, and while those paths may be difficult, they're still ours to walk. I've made peace with my past, and I'm learning to live with it. And as I walk forward, I carry that love with me, because love, no matter where it comes from, is always worth remembering. If this story touched you or made you think, please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective and have an open conversation about it. Don't forget to subscribe for more real life stories like this one, where we explore the complexities of love, life, and everything in between. Thank you for listening.